Hi everybody, welcome to season 5 of Educator Yarns. My name is Jess Staines. I'm the director of the Career Curriculum, which is an Aboriginal early childhood consultancy that's based on Dark and Young Country on the New South Wales Central Coast. We offer professional development for early childhood educators through webinars, retreats, events, and in-services. This time round on season 5 of Educator Yarns, I'll be joined by Bec Burch, who's the founder of Kindy's Australia, which is a program that supports educators in enriching opportunities for play and learning in nature for children. Bec has an extensive background in early childhood education. She leads Bush Kindy's Australia, where they take children into nature spaces in all weather, and it gives them the opportunity to play and learn. Bec has experience that spans over many years regarding training and mentoring in nature play, and she's worked in Nature Play Queensland, TAFE New South Wales, and as well previously Cottonwood Learning. So welcome everyone to season 5 of Educator Yarns, where we'll be mainly focusing on the intersection of nature play and Aboriginal culture and giving advice and hopefully some pearls of wisdom for early childhood educators who are wanting to delve deeper into Aboriginal programs and explore opportunities for rich and meaningful nature play experiences. Before we get into the episode today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered on and pay my respects to elders both past and present, as well as acknowledging any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander educators who are tuning in. Hi everybody, welcome back for another episode of Educator Yarns. I am here with Bec Burch from Bush Kindy's Australia. Hey Bec.
Hello, good morning.
Today's episode, we are going to be talking about the worst things that have happened when we've gone out of the gate or on country with children, because I feel that there's a lot of anticipation from educators and maybe some anxiety about the unknown and control about the things that they can't control, I suppose, and what could happen. But really, I think there's a lot of risks that we can mitigate and just share some of our experiences about what has happened that we haven't been able to preempt and plan for and how we responded to that. But a lot of the risks that I feel educators are concerned about are definitely things that we can be proactive in ensuring that they don't occur. A lot of their anxieties and fears. What do you reckon, Bec?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the proactive approach is the way to go to minimize any of those worst things happening to us. I know if you throw that question to me, people kind of think I'm going to answer with, some big scary stories about seeing snakes or having spider bites. None of those things have happened in my space. And, there are some programs that are in very bushy sites where there are some snake sightings, but they also see them in their childcare centre. That's just where they're situated. But overall, typically it's quite rare. And they aren't the worst things that happen to programs that are heading out of the gate and out of the fence. It's often really much smaller things than that are unpredictable. And it's often things like coming across a dog in the park. Dogs come bounding in. They can be big, they can be jumpy, and they see kids and like, woohoo, let's go play with a bunch of kids. And not every child feels comfortable around dogs. So, that's one of those unpredictable things that can be a little bit tricky to navigate. And often when I talk to other Bush Kindy educators and talk about, what are some of the challenging things you face, and it's often the dogs. But we can even be proactive with that, teaching children how to respond when they see a dog. There's a number of different programs out there that can even come and do incursions in your program about that. So if we're teaching children and planning ahead of time, then we can make that a safe situation. That, yes, we may see a dog that could be off the leash, but we're going to be able to maintain safety. So there's no worst case disaster happening from seeing this dog. And I mean, one of those key planning items is just like making sure you know where you're going and it's not a off dog leash area. Going and visiting those spaces at the times you're going to visit them, and make sure there's not like a dog training business there at the same time. So a lot of the planning and being proactive is the key one there.
I'm smiling and nodding my head because I didn't even think of this when we were having a yarn before this episode, but I just recently got back from Tamworth and there's a huge big playground which we stopped off at with our kids. We were traveling back from Armidale and they were playing on all the equipment. But as we were there, we noticed that there was a huge flying fox colony that was right up the back. So we went up the hill and there was like hundreds and hundreds of flying foxes up the back. And Shirley and I were standing there and we were looking at the signs and looking at all the flying foxes as they were moving and screeching and talking and
Mm.
flying and whatever they were doing. And the lady walked behind us with a dog on a lead, a loose lead, quite a big dog, and it jumped up on Shirley. I told her it was trying to lick her on the face, but it was trying to bite her on the face. It was quite a big dog, and she was terrified. And I was right there. The dog was on a lead,
Yeah.
like, and there's things like that it could just they're freak things that you can't anticipate. I wasn't looking, I don't have eyes in the back of my head,
Mm.
and I thought that we were like it was a kid's playground. Like I thought we were
Yeah.
quite safe, but it is those types of things that you can't always, I mean, like, yes, like if it's a regular place that you're going at a regular time of the day and it's a community place, then I think, and that is most of the cases within early
Mm.
learning services. But for her at the time, I was saying to her, like, when we see flying foxes, if they're on the ground, we can't touch them, and the reasons why, because they've got diseases and so forth, and you have to be vaccinated to be able to touch them. I was deep in conversation about, flying foxes
Yeah.
and the risks of being around those animals and how we had to be safe, not getting too close to them and all this sort of stuff because they were everywhere. And I totally missed the dog situation at the
Mm.
back, eyes at the back of my head. But
I
for
think
her, she's used to dogs. Like we have big dogs. It did hurt her, and the dog was aggressive, and we were very lucky that it didn't hurt her. But she sort of spun away and she immediately got down low in a hunch,
Mm.
which is what we've talked about needing to do if ever a
Yeah.
dog does approach you, right? Is to be really still and get into a ball. So those are things that we can prepare our children for, as you say, if you're going into parklands that are around your service. Yeah, so
Yeah.
true. Mm.
And when we start educating children, they educate each other and empower each other. Like one of our children will see a dog and they'll just call out, "Dog, be boring." And so they all put their heads down, yep, crouch down, look
Yeah.
down, don't give eye contact.
Yeah.
There's some of the service I've worked with that have had a real active approach in those spaces. One of them I know just used to put out a little A-frame at each end of their little space that was like kids at play in this area. So that it warned people in the community that there was children so that dog owners could be a little bit more proactive as they walked past. I know another service went and approached the council and asked for them to just put some extra signs up because it was a, no dog area, but they found that there quite regularly were some dogs off leash. And so they just chatted to the council so there was more signage. So the community were more aware of what that space was allocated to. And that was really successful. I
Also,
think,
where I am on the Central Coast, for whatever reason, there are always dogs that have gotten out, out of the gate and they're roaming the streets. And I know that sounds really terrible, but it's a regular thing on our community pages. Oh, there's a dog out on Renwick Street, someone grab it, I'm taking it to the pound or whatever it might be. So it's about dogs that are roaming without owners as well. So what will you do if you're
yeah,
out and about with children and you run into situations like that? So yeah, I think the dog thing is a really valid point. And there's a service that we work with, oh, not that we work with, but that we visited quite a few times, the Point Preschool at Oyster Bay, and they back onto bushlands. And to walk into the bushlands, there's a park that's right next to them that has some play equipment and so forth. And so they've actually put signs around, not so much about the dog safety, but the dog poo that gets left
oh, yeah.
behind, and some signs up saying that this is our space and please pick up your poo, and putting out bags and so forth to advocate for people to do that. But I mean, if I think some of the worst things that have happened to me when I've been out, there's nothing worse than stepping in dog poo.
No, yeah,
That really does put a damper on it all, doesn't it? Stepping in dog poo.
it
Anyway, yeah.
absolutely does. Yeah, and I think the key for educators is to really be prepared, be really proactive, look at it, we're going to head out the gate, we're going to go to these spaces. Do your due diligence around risk benefit assessments. Go and assess the space. what are those hazards there? Is it snakes, but is it dogs? In North Queensland, some of the services we work with, it's crocodiles. Those hazards out in the community spaces, which is predominantly where most bush kindies head out into community. Sometimes it's in school or private land. And really thinking about how can we actively manage those hazards to minimize any injuries. And it's the planning is the key. So probably when I get asked that question, like, what's the worst thing that happened? And there really isn't, because we've spent a lot of time being really proactive, doing lots of planning, thinking about every possible bad situation and what could we do to minimize that ever occurring. But then also, what would we do if we came across that? But one of the challenges we get is, because we're on community side, is we arrive to our site in the morning and there might be a stream of council trucks that have suddenly decided that to do a whole lot of work in the park space. So they've got semi-trailers and diggers and all sorts of things. One of our parks backs onto a lake that at least 2 or 3 times a year they clear out all the algae. And there's no warning for that. But, it's one of the planning things that we have in place is that there's enough time for staff to do kind of a site check and make sure the space is safe. And so if we get there and there are these trucks there, we have backup sites. And so I really encourage programs to kind of think, okay, if we can't go to that site today because something is there, where else can we go to? Is there another part of that park just on the other side that we can venture to, or a different site? So, yeah, part of that planning can just be thinking about some backup and secondary and third sites.
And also, when you first arrive to the site, maybe one educator sits down with the group of children while the second educator does a sweep, and you're looking for sharps and needles or anything that's been left in the area over the weekend. Often, if you go on a Monday, people could have been barbecuing in the area over the weekend and they've left things behind that might be a hazard to children. So I think doing site checks, not just for snakes and spiders, but for glass or, things that could have broken or whatever, particularly if you've got young infants and toddlers, if there's anything that they can pick up and put in their mouths, looking for the dog poo, just doing a little bit of an assessment of the space before the children then have free range to go and explore.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a must. And also the planning can involve the looking at the weather. And also long-term kind of like what are potential emergencies, like the environmental weather emergencies that could occur. And in some parts of our country, that might be dust storms. In others, it might be floods. Others, it might be high winds or even cyclones. Our weather is determinant on where we're all living. But thinking about what are those kind of risks in our area and what could we do in the event that one of those was approaching. Even on the windy days, choosing a different site. We've had sites that are very coastal and by the dunes and the beach and very, very windy. But then there can be another site that we could go to that's on the same day with the same wind factor, but it's just very secluded. And, on the other side of the hill where there's not the wind factor. Thinking about sites that might not have big eucalypt gum trees that potentially could drop branches on those windy days. So even the planning looks at, what are those environmental risks and looking at the weather of what's potential for the year, but also, what's coming up today and tomorrow.
And so have you ever worked with your local fire station to develop a bush fire evacuation plan for any of your sites? Have you partnered with them to do that?
Yes, absolutely. The local SES and talked about, because it is the locals in your site, and for a lot of educators, we might not even live where we work and the places that we're visiting. But definitely worked with them to kind of go, where is the best place to evacuate to if we needed to, which would be the best route. It is the locals and the people that have had to deal with those emergencies that know all that information. It's like, oh, that's great to say, tell your parents to come and pick up the children here, but that's the road that floods the quickest, so you'd be better off going at this alternative. I definitely always recommend getting that external consultation. Local fire brigades, local rural fire brigades. Sometimes there can be just local emergency groups or SES groups. And sometimes it's just neighbours even, there might be neighbouring properties that back onto that site that you're visiting out in community, and getting to know them and them chatting to you about what some of those potential hazards are and the best way to navigate that.
Hi everyone, I'm just jumping in quickly to remind you all that Bec and I have a series of upcoming events and workshops all throughout Queensland. where we'll be yarning about the new ELF principles, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, and sustainability. We'll be in Toowoomba, Cairns, the Gold Coast, Brisbane, Mackay, Townsville, you name it, we'll be there. And we hope to see you all there. All right, take care, everyone. Enjoy the episode.
So, in the instances that you have seen snakes, what's happened? Have the children just stumbled upon them? Have the educators identified that they're there before they're there? Do you prep children? Any close calls with children trying to touch them or pick them up?
Yeah, it's definitely the hot topic in Bush Kindy about how do we navigate snakes. For most of the time, we don't see them. So in our program, currently, we haven't seen one at all in 3 years at all in any of our programs. But in the previous program, over 5 years, I think I saw 3 or 4. And once or twice that was in our safety check that staff were doing. So I think that's why that safety check is really important, that we are checking for all types of hazards and not just on the ground. Like when I'm looking at my site, I'm looking up into the tree because it might be a loose branch that's hanging down, or it could be the snake. I'm looking in the water. One of the times I saw a snake, it was in the water, swimming across the lake. So the safety check is definitely important, but like say we could be out for a few hours and the snake could just venture out. The times that I've seen the snakes with children have been, we've always have an educator in the front of a group. So if you're going for a walk and exploring, or walking to your site, I think it's pretty standard practice that we always have educators at the front and back to kind of monitor and keep children safe. And hopefully that means that the educators, if there was going to be a snake or any other kind of hazard, that the educator is going to see it first. I've never had any children kind of want to touch or anything, because I guess we educate, and that education is just like every week, every session about, what do we do if we see snakes? And how we freeze like a tree and we don't move, and then we practice. And we practice that so much. And literally just 2 weeks ago, one of our children said they thought they saw it. He goes, I think I saw a snake. And so I just called out snake freeze. Everybody just froze on their spot. And he said, it was just down there. And he said, oh, it was really little. It's only as big as my pinky and it was yellow. So I kind of thought, and it was open grass, still took it very seriously. So everybody was frozen. We asked them to walk slowly back to the educator. And then we checked that area thoroughly. And yeah, we couldn't find a snake. We didn't see anything. There could have been one and it went off, but it was, he did say it was only small and like a pinky. So maybe potentially it wasn't, and it was something else. But it was a great opportunity to practice that. And we just do that all the time, so that in the event there is a real snake that children come across, they're not going to jump up and down and scream and run and have a snake chase after them. They are going to freeze and not move. And then hopefully what snakes tend to do when people freeze is that they back away and they slither back into the bush. So that kind of education piece around supporting children how to be safe in the bush is really, really important. And yeah, years ago when we did see them, we came across a great big carpet python that was just curled up in the middle of the path, and we all stopped and went back to a group, and the children chatted, and some of them were really curious about it. And, they have that innate sense of wonder in their environment. And so we were able to walk closer because we established that it was a carpet python that was non-venomous. We established that it was curled up and asleep, wasn't moving, that we could just venture a little bit closer to have a closer look at it. The children had lots of questions, and eventually it went off in the path, into the bush off the path, and went into its merry little way. But yeah, I've actually rarely seen them, considering the amount of time I've spent in the bush. It's quite remarkable, but it also might just be the areas. I know certainly in North Queensland, in some of the places that I work with, they have a few more snake sightings than I do.
And I think some of those games, well, it's not really a game, it's a safety thing, right? But snake freeze, back away, or drop like a rock, or whatever it is, those are games that you could play within the service, similar to musical statues, I suppose, where they're practicing those routines. And the strategies are being kept at the forefront of their minds. It's not something that you've talked about once and it's forgotten. And I think also like where we are, like we get snakes here. Again, it's rare. It's been really hot days, often down near our taps, you know, they're looking for water. We'll see them. But it is really rare. But we also have a reptile park that's not too far from us. And a lot of the schools and early learning services on the coast take the children to the reptile park, or they'll have incursions at the centre. So talking about snakes and snake safety proactively through hands-on experiences and community connections is something that we can also do. But that shouldn't be a reason that we don't go out the gate, because it is all manageable. And then obviously you would do first aid training, keeping that relevant, and there are snake kits that you can get in case the worst does happen. So I think you prepare for the worst, but just like most things that happen at our services, like we have evacuation drills and we have fire drills, but how rare do you hear on the news that an early learning service has caught fire and gone up in flames? You know, like we practice these things, but very rarely does it actually come to fruition that we need to use those skills. Have you had any serious injuries?
With children, no. The worst injuries we've had has actually been myself, which is interesting. I have been deep in play, which is every day, just totally engaged, and had my head down with my hat on, lifted my head up, and I hit a tree and gave myself a knock to the head. So that one wasn't great. So that's probably the worst kind of nature play injury in our program. The interesting thing about nature is that I know educators always think, you know, yeah, the worst things are going to happen once we head out the fence, and it's so scary and it's risky and there's all these dangerous things. But there's this really interesting theory about assuming safety. And so it talks about when children go into, say, McDonald's playground, or even one of our standardized structured plastic playground structures, children assume safety because that's what the environment tells them. That space, that standardized structure just says, this is safe, you're fine, come on and have a play. Whereas when children enter into nature spaces and they're navigating bush and rocky ground and uneven ground, or it might be slippery, or it might just be the wobbly balancing log, there might be hill, there might be mud, that environment tells them it's unsafe. And so they are immediately more cautious. They're more aware of their body, their spatial awareness, their surroundings. They don't assume safety. They actually manage it. And it's what we call the risk detection skills being turned on, where they can actually navigate their sites and their spaces. And so research actually shows there's a lot less injuries and incidents in nature spaces than there is in the standardized spaces where children assume safety.
So interesting.
Risk detection skills are turned on.
I love that. And really, if I think about watching my kids and how they are outdoors, I mean, it's very normal for them. Like we're out often, but I've often said to my mum, like they're quite confident and capable physically, both of them, but they're not just doing it full throttle. They're very cautious at how they approach things, and it's measured in what they're doing. So even when they slide down the hills on their bottoms, they're sort of start, stop, assessing whether they can and navigating themselves. So it's not like they're rolling down, freewheeled, bumping their head and, you know, scratching their arms all along the way. So yeah, I've observed that with my own kids as well.
Yeah. It's the consistent feedback we get from educators as a surprising thing. They go, we thought there'd be heaps of injuries, but no, you were right. And yes, the research is right. There's actually a lot less injuries out there. And educators reflect how there is actually so many injuries in our early learning spaces as it is, of just all those everyday things where kids getting sand flicked in their eyes, or bumping into a pole, or tripping over a chair. Like those things are happening every day, all of the time. But, you know, when we're out and about, when children are climbing trees, they are going slower. They are being more careful when they're using sticks. So, yeah, we do see a lot less injuries, and that's the reports and the feedback back from educators all the time.
I went to an early childhood network event up here on the Central Coast last week, and there was Berkeley Vale Community Preschool and Bright Start in Batto Bay. They were sharing their out of the gate experiences, and they also talked about some of the trickier things that have happened to them whilst out the gate. One talked about being approached by members of the community who were very excited to see children out and about and wanting to have a chat, but maybe weren't using the most age-appropriate language and dropping a few F-bombs here and there. And the other talked about the trickiest thing was is that they accidentally got on the wrong bus one day, and tried to work out, had to pivot, to find their way back and so forth. So, I mean, those are sometimes things that, accidents happen, I suppose. Like we've gotten on the wrong bus, so we just find our way to the next main train station or bus stop and chat to someone about how we can then get back to where we're going, and they manage that fine. And they also, had the list of all the parents' numbers and were able to text them in a group chat to say this is what happened, so they're aware where the children were. I think another instance was they were catching the train somewhere, and when they got there, the trains were down. They weren't able to, there was road work or whatever it might be. And so then they thought about, well, they had risk assessments for regular excursions that they did out the gate anyway. So exactly what you said, they just chose another site, another outing. A message got sent to all the families. All the families were very happy for them to proceed and take them to the shops wherever they ended up going. And as for the community members, I personally think it's fine for members of the community to approach children, because they're out in the community, right? They're out to be seen in the community, be part of the community and so forth. But, I don't know, have you ever experienced that where members of the community have approached children that you were cautious about or not so sure about?
Yes and no. I think we get a lot of interactions and engagement with community. Even when I pick quite quiet parks and quiet reserves and spaces that I think are out of the way and we're not going to be disturbing other people or groups, there's still people that are exercising. We come across amazing groups because we pick those kind of bushier, quieter places and not busy playgrounds to explore. We come across bird watching groups or plant regeneration groups and land care and council workers. So there's amazing people that you can really connect with. But over the years, there's been one or two. I had one this year, and it was actually when I was kind of setting up, and they were asking a lot of questions like how many children are coming and how many teachers. There was just, I had that gut feeling, and it was just making staff aware. And by the time children came, that person was well away. But again, that planning of what have you got in place if there was somebody dangerous, or just even using inappropriate language with one staff member, how could the other staff member take all the children over to the other part of the park? So what's that callback? I know we always talk about, 1, 2, 3, come to me. So if we have anything dangerous or just concerning, we can group the children together really quickly, keep them safe, move them away from whatever that hazard is. I think, predominantly people are really positive and engaging, can actually enrich your program. We've learned so much from people, but definitely there are some people that might just not.
Be aware. Be aware
of appropriate language. Or sometimes it might be, I guess where I've come across is where it actually hasn't been them engaging with us. It is just people that have managed to come to the park and maybe of having an altercation or something that's inappropriate, and it just happens to be in the same area that we are. So again, planning, grouping children together, moving them on and to a different space that's safe. But as soon as there's somebody around, not just the dog walker that's kind of passing by, but if there's someone sitting there and they've got their binoculars out looking for birds, or they're, checking out plants, I'm always the one to kind of go up and go, hey, Bec, I'm from Cottonwood Learning. Who are you? Are you part of a group or an organization? I noticed you checking out the birds. Because that's how we've enriched our program, because we've met some amazing people along the way. So as soon as there's kind of somebody, and sometimes people just stop and kind of look because they're really curious, and I go up and I'm like, introduce myself and did they have any questions, and then just explain, our kids are out and about because they're learning about our local flora and fauna in our community. And as soon as you say that, they're like, this is so good to see kids outdoors and they're not on screens, and they're learning about their local environment. This is fantastic. And so sometimes it's just around curiosity. But I definitely agree with that person. It's probably the two biggest risks for a lot of bush kindy programs is people and dogs, because they are the unpredictable thing. So we can do a fair amount of planning and preparation around that. and some risk management, but they are ones that we have to think about. And they're often not the ones on the forefront. Like people always go, oh, yeah, snakes or a storm or a kid running away. And we need to plan for all situations, but definitely people and dogs are the unpredictable ones.
There's so much thinking that goes into it and so much planning. And I don't want to downplay that. It's not, I don't think it is easy, but it's not insurmountable. Like you can do it. And every site has its own risk and its own context. So it's not like a blanket approach that you just apply the same process to everywhere you go. Like there was a service I met a couple of weeks ago in Taormina on the north coast, Lillypilly South, and they go to a little parklands that's down the road. There's water that runs through. They were happy for the children to play in the water and all that sort of stuff. And the parents were on board. One of the parents sort of thought that was a bit gross. So they went and got the water tested, like to make sure that there was nothing in the water that could make the children sick. So they were able to share that with families. And I probably would never have thought about testing the water, you know. So there are heaps of different situations. I know that when I was in Townsville a couple of months ago and I was saying to them, why don't you get out the gate, you know, on country experiences? They're like, because there's crocodiles. And I was like, oh yeah, like that's probably valid. So there's a heap of things, you know, right around the country that I suppose we need to be aware of. And I know, what's the place where Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Broken Hill.
Broken Hill, right? So last year, we had an educator from Broken Hill come to one of our retreats, and they have an emu that comes, you know, to the centre all the time. So they're looking at emu safety. You know, it's not something I've ever had to consider or think about. So it's horses for courses, right? Like you've got to work out your place and what are the risks where you are. Nature is a beautiful thing and we live with it, not against it. And Aboriginal people have been living with country for, you know, like since the beginning of time. So it's innate in us to be able to live harmoniously with where we are. And I just think there's so many benefits. Have you got questions about nature play, sustainability, or how to meaningfully include Aboriginal culture in your early childhood program? Call 0253 000 306 and leave a voice message for the Educator Yarns podcast. Bec Burch from Bush Kindy Australia and Jessica Staines from the Koori Curriculum will be answering your questions, offering practical advice, cultural guidance, and inspiring ideas to support your teaching and planning. Whether you're just starting out or looking to take your program deeper, your question could shape future episodes and support other educators across the country. Dial in today at 0253 000 306. I guess, Beck, the other thing I wanted to pick your brain about is something that I guess has come up a few times with me is educators hesitant about taking children who have additional needs out of the gate. Sometimes maybe it's a concern from the families that their families think, oh, it's too risky to have them out. Are they going to be able to be kept safe on country programs or out the gate? And sometimes it's educators not feeling confident in those children being left behind with another educator. What are your thoughts and feelings about children getting out the gate that have additional needs?
Yeah, I think for all of our programs, we all have children that have complex needs in many different ways. And, you know, I really strongly believe it's probably those children more than any other child that actually need nature more, because nature is so nurturing for our well-being, for all of children's development very holistically. I always, you know, come back when we're supporting services is think, okay, what are the things that we have to support the child within the centre? Like, do we have extra inclusion funding and have extra support staff in the centre? Well, can that person can also join them when we head out to Bush Kindy? Do they have their favourite things that keep them really safe and secure? Like, and it might be that they're really into dinosaurs or just have a particular cuddly that they bring with them all the time. Well, let's bring those things into Bush Kindy. And you touched on a point before about like those games and practicing around snake safety within the centre. And I think that's the thing is for some of our children with complex needs, change can be a bit of a challenge. And so if we're going from our familiar, safe, regular, very consistent routine indoors, and then we're going out the gate and there's a lot of new things, that can be overstimulating and over challenging, and then there can be triggers for behavioral things. So thinking about what can we bring into our center first, so that that step outside the gate isn't so big, so practicing all of the safety things, for example, for weeks or months on end within the center fence. So yeah, what to do if we see a snake or a dog. If we're doing that callback of 1, 2, 3, come to me, doing those within the fence, doing the activities that we're going to be doing outside the fence in the fence, so within your center, so it's not so unfamiliar. And I think that can really help some of those children with complex needs that struggle with that element of change. And then when you're heading out, and I always say, do it slowly. Like, you don't need to go out the fence and go out for the entire day. It might just be go out and do a story and come back. And it might just be a half an hour thing. It might just be a walk, go look at the site, collect some leaves and walk back. And so starting small, so that kind of really supports those children with complex needs that need time to adjust to those different routines and transitions, and building up on those skills. So yeah, and I think all children need all of those things that I just mentioned. They need those safety things. We don't want to teach everything about Bush Kindy when you're out in Bush Kindy. That's just way too much. We need to be starting that within the centre. And essentially, we'd love to see nature pedagogy embedded within the centre, so that when you are heading out the fence, you're still doing the same things that you do every day. It's just a different environment, and maybe it's different resources that you're using when you are outside of the fence.
Yeah, I think having social stories as well can help, or even filming those experiences and projecting them on the wall so children can revisit them. I know that one centre spoke to me about children finding it hard with transitions. So I said, well, potentially the family can drop the children to the site. So then you're only coming back. You're not settling here and then having to unsettle by moving again. Similar, I've suggested that some families drop children to the site if walking long distances could be an issue. So part of that distance is mitigated. And I feel like most families who have children that have additional needs, they will do anything to advocate for their child to be included and not the ones that are left behind. So, and I feel also by us sort of finding those ways, that is inclusion. That's how it should be. And it also develops families, I guess, confidence that they too can take their children to experience being on country, that it's not just, it's not for them, I suppose. There's a book that I often have referred educators to, which I don't know if I should use this as an example because it involves a snake, but do you know the story of Walk in the Jungle? It's about a teacher that's going on an excursion. Yes. She's got a line of children that are walking through the jungle. Some are on walking frames, one's in a wheelchair, and they all get eaten by the snake, everyone. And that's inclusion. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, I think to me, I just shows that everybody belongs in the jungle and we can all get eaten by snakes. But anyway, I just think of that book. It comes to mind when I feel that all children have a right to be with country. It's really important.
Absolutely. I gave a strategy to a service last week. We were talking about how we could best support a child that was nonverbal. And if we think about some of those children that might be in our care that might not be physically able to climb the trees with the other children, might not be up to that level of capabilities to manage tools and whittling knives just yet, or building cubbies. It might not be up yet, just, depending on where their development is, and thinking about some non-visual things. So we just talked about even creating some little visual cards by going out into that space, taking photos of the different plant. Like, there were some really significantly different leaf types and bark and a bug and a flower, and taking those and using as a bit of like a treasure hunt to go and find. So even our non-verbal children can engage in those spaces. So I think if we look at the ways we adapt our programs, our curriculum, and the learning experiences we provide to meet the needs of the children when we're in the services, we do that every day on our tables and our mats. How can we also do the same outside? So, whilst we might be going, oh, let's go on a bug hunt or a plant hunt, and kids are just going looking and going, oh, I found a yellow one and I found a brown one. Let's support also the children that may not be speaking yet, and use visual cues and things like that. So just adapting.
Yeah, for sure. That's amazing. Great tips. Thanks, Bec, for yarning with me about the worst thing that's happened to you on Bush Kindy. I think I think it is the story that we tell ourselves sometimes about, and sometimes we predict things that just never come to fruition, but it's always good to be prepared. And I feel that the more preparation that we do to mitigate those risks, the more confident we feel that if by chance we do encounter them, that we're capable of overcoming the situations that do arise. And for educators that are listening in that might have some questions about risks or getting started or want to share their experiences of being out on country with children who have additional needs or how they've overcome some challenges, we encourage you to dial in. So our podcast number is 0253 000 306, and you can leave a message which we will then play on one of our podcast episodes. Thanks everybody for listening. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. To find out more information about the Koori curriculum and how we can best support you in your early learning service, visit www.kooricurriculum.com.